One. Good afternoon, class. My name is Noah Witt Edwards, and today we'll be talking about the disability sport para surfing. So, for a little bit of background, the International Surfing Association, the ISA, is the world governing body for the sport of surfing. In the last few years, especially since surfing became an Olympic sport, the original designation of adaptive surfing morphed into para surfing. Now, why is this the case? It's because the ISA aims to be a code compliant with the para sports classification structure and eventually join the Paralympic Games. So let's not waste any time and talk about certain classification criteria for para surfing. So the first we have is impaired muscle power. So athletes surfers with impaired muscle power have an underlying health condition that either eliminates or reduces their ability to voluntarily contract muscles or move to generate force. Examples can include a spinal cord injury, muscular dystrophy, post polio syndrome, XYZ. Next, we have impaired passive range of motion. Sufferers with impaired range of motion have a lack or a restriction of passive motion in one or more joints. Examples can include, I think it's arthrogyroposis. You can correct me on that, and contracture resulting from chronic joint immobilization or trauma affecting a joint. It could be either or. Next, we'll move into limb deficiency. Surfers with limb deficiency have a partial or total absence of bones or joints as a consequence of trauma, illness, or congenital limb deficiency. So pretty much that. Our fourth classification is a leg length difference. Surfers that have a difference in the length of their legs as a result of disturbance of limb growth or a result of trauma. Fifth will be short stature. Uh, Surfers with short stature that have a reduced length in the bones of the lower limbs and or trunk. Examples can include growth hormone dysfunction and osteogenesis imperfecta. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Six, we have hypotonia. Surfers with hypotonia have an increase in muscle tension and a reduced ability of muscles to stretch caused by the damage to central nervous system. Examples can include a TBI, traumatic brain injury, cerebral palsy, and or stroke. Seventh is ataxia. Surfers with ataxia have uncoordinated movements caused by damage to the CNS. Examples can also include the TBI, cerebral palsy, a stroke, and multiple scoliosis. Eighth, we have athiotosis. Suffering with athiotosis have continual, slow, and involuntary movements. Examples include a stroke, cerebral palsy, or TBI. And ninth, and at least not last, vision impairment. The determination of visual class is based upon the eye with better visual acuity whilst weighing the best optical correction. So, they'll just kind of take athletes and run them through the ringer as they try to figure out what vision impairment they have. So I know it's from a scale of V1 to V12. And again, that's more of an optometry degree, and we're not here to talk about optometry. So next, let's get into parasurfing. I guess the best way you would say it is disciplines of parasurfing. So there'll be 8 in total. The first is the PSS1, Parasurfing Stand 1. So athletes, so the criteria, we'll go over criteria, expectations, and scoring. So athletes are allowed to have support getting into and out of the water and on and off of their board, but are required to be independent in the water during their competition heat. Athletes in this class must paddle into a wave without assistance and surf. Waves will not be scored if a surfer does not stand up on the board. The next classification, we have the Parasurfing Stand 2, a PSS2. This is a discipline for surfers with a lower body impairment below the knee or short stature who ride waves in a standing position. Athletes are allowed to support getting to and out of the water and on and off of their board, but are required to be independent in the water during the competition heat. Athletes in this class must paddle into a wave without assistance in surf, and waves will not be scored if a surfer does not stand up on the board. Next, we have a PSS free, parasurfing stand free. This is a discipline for surfers who ride waves in a standing position with a lower body impairment above the knee. Athletes are allowed to have support getting into and out of the water and on and off of their board, but are required to be independent in the water during their competition heat. Athletes in this class must paddle into a wave without assistance in surf, and waves will not be scored if the surfer does not stand up on the board. If you see a pattern here. Next, we'll go into the PSK, parasurfing kneel. This is a discipline for surfers who ride waves in a kneeling or sitting position. Athletes are allowed to have support getting into and out of the water and often on and off of their board, but are required to be independent in the water during the competition heat. Athletes in this class must paddle into a wave without assistance and surf while kneeling or sitting on a surfboard. Surfing while standing or lying in prone position is not permitted in this sport class. Waves will not be scored if an athlete does not kneel or sit. Next, we'll go to the PSP2, parasurfing prone to classification. This is a discipline for surfers who ride waves in a prone position and need assistance into paddle waves and while in water. Athletes in this sport class are permitted to have support getting to and out of the water and on and off of their board. Athletes are permitted to have assistance from a surf guide while paddling out to the lineup and being pushed into the waves. Athletes are required to be independent while surfing. Athletes in the sports class will paddle into a wave without assistance and surf while in a prone position on a surfboard. Surfing while sitting, kneeling, and standing is not permitted in this sports class. Waves will not be scored if an athlete does not lie in prone position. Additional equipment is permitted in the sports class to assist the athlete in remaining on the surfboard, but it's very kind of upscale tight. And again, we do not have time to go over the whole sport. We're kind of just giving you the basics. Last but not least, we're going into parasurfing visual impairment 1, PSV1, VI1. This discipline's for surfers who have a visual impairment with total blindness. Athletes in the sport are permitted to have support getting into and out of the water and on and off of their surfboard, but are required to be independent in the water during their competition heat. Athletes in this sport class will paddle into a wave without assistance and surf while standing on a surfboard. Surfing while sitting, kneeling, or lying in a prone position is not permitted in this sports class. Waves will not be scored if a surfer does not stand up on the board. The athlete is permitted to choose one surf guide to be in the water during competition and receive verbal cues from the surf guide while paddling and catching waves. And finally, we have an PSVI2, parasurfing impairment 2. This is a discipline for surfers who have a visual impairment with partial blindness. All goes the same for someone with PSV1. They allow assistance in and out of the water. They will have a guide while giving verbal cues, and the waves will not be scored if the surfer does not stand up on the board. So essentially the same, but in terms of scoring, classification, and medal giving, everything is equity. It's all about fairness. So that is the end of my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed learning about parasurfing.